Hi, everybody. I am Caroline Thorne. I am a curator at PharmGKB, have been for quite a long time. We are starting these Ask a Curator sessions to try and better understand like who's using our data knowledge base and why, and what they want to find, and if we can make it easier for people to find what they want to find. And so that's why we had people send in questions in advance. So I'm going to start sharing my screen to do a bit of like just looking around. If people want to ask questions as we go, I'm guessing that we have a mixture of people that have looked around the site a lot and people that haven't. If people overwhelmingly feel I'm going over stuff that they know. Oh, hello. Okay, we'll just keep going. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. All right. So we've got the home page. I'm actually going to go from a basic search. You can put anything in here: genes, drugs, diseases, haplotypes, so on. We're just going to go from a well-known pharmacogene and use that as an intro to the gene page. And we've got all the different links to different types of information that have been tagged for this gene. We had a question about the VIP summaries. So some of our most very important pharmacogenes or VIP genes have a link in the center here to a summary. Many of these were written as kind of a review article. They're published in PG&G Journal. They were done in collaboration with experts on those particular genes, and they have kind of like an overview and some of like the historic information about the genes, about the variants that are important, haplotypes that are important, how this relates to pharmacogenomics, and for like it tells you how old these are, and some of these actually at this point are quite old. We do not do regular updates apart from anything that is overtly obsolete or wrong. So if particular haplotypes have been redefined, or RSIDs that have been retired and superseded by something else, that will get updated here, and that kind of thing is noted within the history. But we are not continually updating them to add in new publications on the pharmacogenomics side, because overall those are are coming in and being captured in other places. If we were to put in the papers from every variant annotation on some of these genes, we would just be pulling them in forever. And so if you're wanting the most up-to-date things that we have in PharmGKB on particular gene variant drug variant phenotype relationships, you're going to be coming to the variant annotations. So that's this sidebar here, and there's a lot for 2C19, so it's taking a second to bring it up. Hopefully no one on our team has been breaking things while we're doing this. Here we go. So for those who are not familiar with what are sort of what I think of as the bread and butter to our site nowadays, these we're going to go look at an individual one. So from a paper, an individual relationship that a curator has extracted from the paper, you've got the link to the paper, that this particular haplotype, oh, I picked a bad one because this one's like not associated, but you've got a phenotype, the direction of the effect, the drug, and the type of patient group, and then actual details about the patient group, and then, as you saw on this list, we've got like hundreds of these, and you can limit this by saying I'm only interested in, let's say, the most famous drug for, oops, let's spell it right too, that you only want to see clopidogrel ones. Sorry, my browser's messing that up. So yeah, you could look for your particular drug of interest, whether that's and then see all the variant annotations. So this is individual papers and individual relationships, and then the next step from that is our clinical annotations. So the aggregation of these variant annotations into a summary of all those relationships. So we'll look at the top level one. And we've got the different genotype, different haplotypes, what the CPIC function is for that haplotype, and then the summary of the evidence from the variant annotations, how this is combined by scores, which is, I can go into in a minute too. And then underneath the guidelines that contributed to this, and then all the individual papers that I'm going to look. There's probably a very long list here because it said there were oh, it doesn't actually say how many. Oh, there it is. Yeah, 62 papers. All right, so we've done VIPs, we've done variant annotations, we've done clinical annotations. Let's go back to that list here and do guidelines. So there was a question from someone about guidelines, very specifically about like combining guidelines. At the moment that we don't have anything about combining guidelines, what you can do is go to each one and get the individual haplotype-based advice for that guideline. So we've got what the source of the guideline is here, and we've got all our CPIC ones. There's a lot that involve 2C19, and each different drug it shows here when you've got a drug that there's no recommendation. So let's go and look at clopidogrel. We've got some advice here on how to what all this means if you're coming to one of these for the first time, and then up here is your if you know what genotype you're interested in, what the recommendations are. All right, I'm going to take a breath, and if people have questions on what we've gone through so far, or like need more information, maybe people can chime in or put your hand up, or
You're also welcome to put questions in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that.
yeah. If people are able to put their cameras on as well, if oh, hi, we've got a question. Oh, go ahead and unmute. And
hi, this is Allison Quinn. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. I just had a question, so I'm the one who asked about the VIPs. The main reason why I was asking that question actually was kind of what you were showing about with this summary piece, which of course though you're using CYP2C19, which is of course, you know, a big CPIC drug, so it's going to have of course guidelines and lots of information. The trouble where I come up against that maybe some other folks on this call have too is when I'm trying to research a gene that is maybe somewhat commonly tested for, but it doesn't have any CPIC or other clinical guidance on. A really easy example is CYP1A2, for instance. And in those cases, or MTHFR is another really good. Yeah, okay. I know. Yes, I'm aware. It's horrible. I don't I don't condone it, but you know, when you're a clinician, you have to deal with it. In these instances where, you know, just as kind of like a first check-in kind of, you know, or maybe it's a more obscure gene that I don't know quite as much about, I will see if there's a VIP, and if there is, I typically find that helpful. But I have noticed that some appear to be much more helpful than others, and that also some appear to be quite old versus others. And I recognize that, as you said, you can't be constantly updating that, and I fully accept that. But I was wondering what your recommendation might be for trying to find that summary component. For instance, with MTHFR, I know there's some language about how it might be implicated with methotrexate and other potential drugs. But then when you go to the actual variant annotations, it seems like everything is level 3. So then it just seems kind of confusing about like, well, should I be listening to what's on the VIP, or should I, you see what I mean? Because the variant annotations doesn't always seem to have a great summary aspect to it, but maybe I'm also not looking in the right place to kind of get to that kind of more convenient, almost like up-to-date, you know, way of quickly taking a snapshot of what's the broad picture for this gene and its value.
So some of that is because for a long time we were only funded to be a resource for research. We were not really permitted to have anything that had the word clinical in it. And obviously things have changed, like dramatically so in the last 10 years. And so, yeah, some of the tone of older VIPs is very much from a research perspective, that if you're interested in methotrexate, that you should be looking at MTHFR. But when you look at what evidence that we have, and that's one of those ones where we really needed to have the scoring on the variant annotations. And to be honest, you could spend your life trying to annotate all the papers on MTHFR and still not find a consensus, I think. It's a tricky one. And I did my postdoc in a lab that looked at MTHFR. Like we can go see the level 3s, and you can see quite how that comes about. So this one isn't so bad. This one's it's from 13 publications, but you've got really a mixed bunch. I think even on the level 2 ones, what happened was we had to break things out into quite specific phenotypes, and then you started to see a little bit of something. But the scores really help you to see whether something, I think, is getting to the point where it can be used.
Okay, yeah, this is helpful, just even knowing that,
like
just scrolling down.
Yeah, to see where you've got like how much information, and we're not judging, we're giving as much information as we can about the types of studies, but obviously this is an area where there's a huge range of impact from other environmental factors too, that you just can't capture sometimes, in terms of like whether it's from a region that has folate supplementation, and likely to be a lot of dietary, like the artificial folates in flour and so on, and whether that has an effect. But you can break it down and see what we've got. What the difficulty is how we had a question too about like how we review references and what references we review. So we are not we have a very small team. We are not able to do comprehensive reviews on everything all the time. We are attempting to get like the highest, the most obvious stuff in first. So we have the main pharmacogenomics journals like Pharmacogenomics, the Pharmacogenomics Journal, PG&G, CPT, and there's a few others that we routinely try and get everything from. We also have a couple of different methods going to use NLP, natural language processing, to identify pharmacogenomics articles in the literature that we can curate. Some of these at the moment are, oops, actually I probably could have found it on, if we go back to MTHFR, down here where it says automated annotations. So we are not integrating these with our stuff at the moment, because these are not curated. We are using them as ourselves as a starting point to do variant annotations, but we decided also to show people what we had coming in case they were like desperate for something, So on MTHFR, you've got a lot of already curated annotations, but if you pick something, a gene that we don't have much on, but it's got some of these automated annotations, you might be really interested to try and look there for something. Or if you're just looking for more, like I said, we're not comprehensively like capturing everything immediately. We try and follow the things that are, yeah, like the highest impact first. And, we've got things coming in from the automated screening. We've got sometimes people recommend papers to us, and then as we're doing other collaborations on pathways or VIPs, then we might also offer, like during the guideline process, there is a comprehensive review done for the drugs and the genes involved in that guideline. Is that a question in the chat? Oh.
Yes, there is.
What are the differences? Yes, in evidence ratings between CPIC and PharmGKB. How should we apply the ratings in implementation? So the PharmGKB ratings are based on what we have right now. It's like, here is the evidence we have and here's what that scores. If we were to do a comprehensive review, that could totally change. CPIC are starting from the point that they, like we also, as curators, we have to be a jack of all trades in a lot of ways. We're, some of us have more expertise in particular areas than others, but we have to be looking from across a broad range of different genes and drugs and phenotypes. How the CPIC groups work up is that if they're doing a guideline on a particular thing, they're looking for people with a focused interest in that area, and then they're going to do a comprehensive review. So their rating is from a clinical perspective, whereas ours is on like the size of what we've got so far and the direction it's going. Does that help?
If I can just jump in a second. Caroline's right, the CPIC ratings are a lot more clinically focused, so they're affected by things like if there's an alternative therapy available. So it's more to do with the clinical actionability of the gene drug pair as well, which isn't something that we take into account because we just curate the information that's out there.
I think this might, like Michelle's talk about what the difference between CPIC and PharmGKB and PharmVar and PharmCat that's available on the YouTube channel is a good, if you've got an hour to sit down and like really understand all of those 4 resources and what the differences are, that's a good way to kind of see all the differences. Okay. Oops, some of the variants have good evidence in a mechanistic view, but don't have clinical evidence. Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. Like the at the variant annotation level, you might be seeing all kinds of different types of information, whether it's like clinical phenotypes or yeah, like in vitro studies and so on. I thought I saw hands up from someone and I'm not seeing now. Is there a question?
Yeah, hi, can I ask a question, Caroline?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So can we move from, for example, variant to automated annotations? I know that you use here the gene itself to find the automated annotation for that gene, but is there, like, if I go to the variant itself, is there, okay,
It's there too, yeah.
That's very good. The other thing is, why some variants have like annotations but don't have any clinical annotations? Is there any criteria to move, like to have clinical annotation but not, so to have variant annotation only without clinical annotation? Is it because of the level that you talk about, or?
Yeah, so some of that's just like there's no set criteria at the moment, I think, that like a clinical annotation must be written. It's a bit more at the discretion of the curator. So if you've come in and you've done a variant annotation and you see that there's something else on that variant, then you can go ahead and write a clinical annotation. But it's some of it's just timing, really. It's it's a bit about not being swamped and having time to be able to go in and look what we've got. And sometimes you just don't see what else is all there because you're at the paper level. So you're focused on reading a particular paper. You might be putting in, I don't know, like some of the papers, you might be putting in 15 different variant annotations to then go look through all of those. So we are working on ways to kind of have better flags for the curators about like what needs us to go back and look for it.
Okay, just gonna ask a small question, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read a paper, do you only do you report the effect size as it in the paper, or do you correct it for any
We
like the value?
report what the paper reports. We
And-
aren't able to go and adjust for like what they should have done, or what, you know, in the same way that if the author says it's significant, that's when we check that is significant. If there are some qualifiers on that, then that gets put in too. But we are trying to basically state what the paper says.
Yeah, and how about the reference genome? So if the reference genome is different, so do you change the genotype or keep it as it's in the paper?
We put everything on the plus chromosomal strand. For the most part, like if the paper reports which variant was associated, and what the alleles were and what the direction of the effect is, you can be pretty sure that we're capturing exactly what the paper has. There are tricky things that happen when authors are not explicit about what they measured and what the allele was with the effect and the direction of the effect. So if you've got something that's like a CG SNP in a gene that's on the minus chromosomal strand, where the allele frequencies are around the 50% mark, it's a crapshoot. Sorry, excuse my language. And often that gets put in the description because you really cannot tell what the author is reporting. Sometimes we can go to them and ask what they measured, what they really want to report, which allele they want to report as having the effect and the direction of the effect. And sometimes people do write back to us and explain it, and we can put that in. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, you get situations, and that shows up when we're trying to write a clinical annotation, that there are some ambiguous ones out there where it's unclear. Yeah. Rachel, you look like you want to add on this. Yeah.
No, I was seeing if you were finished because there was another question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't have anything else to add. You covered everything that I would have said. So to follow up on what we were saying earlier about the differences in evidence rating between PharmGKB and CPIC, Kyung, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, apologies if I'm not, has just asked if we can comment on using PharmGKB levels of evidence where there's good evidence of a mechanistic view but no clinical evidence available. I think this is in the context of implementation.
So I am not a clinician. Here is my disclaimer, you know, like we are not in the business of like providing clinical guidance. Like if you're a clinician and you're looking for any information you've got, you know, if we have information, it's there for you. But I can't comment really on the like how you evaluate that.
If I can jump in quickly, I'm also not a clinician, so I can't give you the answer either. CPIC will be running an event, I think in early June, for people who want to implement pharmacogenomics to ask questions and share resources between each other. So if you have a look out for that, that might be a good place to answer that question or ask that question of people who are also implementing.
We had some other implementation questions on the original question sheet. What was I missing? Oh, someone had asked like about writing an SOP. If you're here, I can't remember who, I don't have the list of who it was. I just wrote down the questions, which is a little remiss of me. Maybe you want to ask your question and specify like what kind of thing you're hoping to write for.
I don't think they're on the call.
Okay. All right, what else are we missing? Someone asked a very specific TPMT question, which I did not have the answer for, and was going to suggest that there are people who they should contact directly. We can put them in touch with too. Okay, now I have lost my train of thought too.
We have one more question in the chat.
Okay, I will look at the question in the chat.
Okay.
Private. Do we have? No, like, I mean, rare variants. Okay, anything that, no, we can only annotate things that are published. So if there's something that's in a case report, we can annotate on it that if it's published, but not anything that's just from sequencing data. I mean, we don't have any. What we have is all on the public site.
Hi, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
So another piece I find very helpful is the various different Excel spreadsheets that you have for, you know, for instance, how common a particular variant is and how common, you know, certain phenotypes are, you know, things like that, which I recognize as probably curated from other sources.
So the ones, the CPIC ones that are like this, these frequency
yes.
tables.
Oh, okay. So that's all completed by CPIC.
Yeah.
Okay.
In general, we are not trying to collate frequency information. there are other places out there doing it on a more global scale. So when we have if I go back to that MTHFR page, we're pulling in things from Nomad and 1000 Genomes and Alpha. Like there are other people doing frequency stuff.
Okay, so in general, would you recommend trying to go to those sources that you just mentioned? Just because I have run across before difficulty, pretty bad difficulty in getting to any of that kind of information on slightly more obscure genes that are still tested for, like they can be on panels, but they don't have CPIC guidance, for instance, and
but why do you need it if it's on the panel?
Oh no, so it's looking more at how appropriate was that panel, you know, like did that a panel, because for instance, you know, if someone comes back normal, if the test did not appropriately look for common variants for that patient population, then the result is invalid effectively. So it's kind of a process of validation of how rigorous is a particular panel's result.
Yeah, although I think in that sense, you don't either want to fall into the trap that like particular populations should be tested for one thing and other populations should be tested for something else. Like if the impact of the variant is significant, it doesn't really matter whether that person's highly likely to have it or highly unlikely to have it. If they have it, they have it, and you need to know
sure. That. I'm not implying that. I'm implying just in general, if for instance a test is only checking for 2 variants for a particular gene, are they missing out other common variants, or is that what is, you know, generally known to you know, be what needs to be tested? It's sort of questions like that.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that's what then you're saying that the assignment of no change is not super reliable, right? Your what you called normal, but is the, I guess, like the default,
right,
or reference, but you're saying they're not testing enough to be sure what that entails.
Exactly.
So, and that, yeah, I mean, I recently wrote a blog on this because this is something that isn't talked about a lot, about how what you need to be looking at, what you are looking at. People are still not being explicit in publications about what they're looking at and what they've ruled out. And that it just, and this is this also gets to another question that someone had about making a database for infants at birth about likely events, in that this is changing. So yes, if they had a particular variant that put them at high risk for something and you knew it at that point, that would track with them, but the absence of variants of effect might change over time as more variants become apparent. So you do need to, you can't be sure that what you've tested for someone will stay the same over time. Got another question. Phenoconversion. Okay. we are starting at PharmGKB to get into covering more drug-drug interaction information. There is still not great, like, it's very basic how things are reported usually. There's not like a good quantitative method of just describing phenoconversion still. So phenoconversion is when you've got a drug-drug interaction that kind of mimics the poor metabolizer phenotype of like a CYP2D6. So having like a strong 2D6 inhibitor, and how, so you've got the interaction of drug-drug and drug genotype, and how incremental change can impact that. The stuff we have at the moment is we have some limited drug-drug interaction information, mostly from drug labels. We have this at the pathway level. So I'm on the spot now about trying to think about where we've got ones that show, where's clozapine? So something where you've got key CYP enzyme there that's responsible for the metabolism of the drug. You've got strong inhibitors that can act on that, and you've also got inducers that can act on that system. We have stuff at the this does interact level. So if you get the component information, the back end information about what was used to make this pathway, it tells you those kind of drug-gene, drug-drug interactions, and where those have come from with the PubMed identifiers. But we don't have anything quantitative. But if you have specific information from like PK studies and so on, it might be possible at some point in the future to like take our pathways and load in your specific information and try and build a model that way. At least that's what I was thinking, by trying to make all these pathways computer processable. But we're still steps away from that, and that's not really our area of expertise, but hopefully we're building something that could be taken by others and used to do this, especially now we have more information on like the individual metabolites and like components within the pathways, that this might give more direct information. All right, I think that answers that. Please chime in if I'm not fully answering what your question is. I think we've covered all the questions that people had in advance. Okay, Rachel's nodding, that's good. All right. Do people have anything further? If anyone's got any suggestions about like what would make things easier to navigate, things that they didn't find, or that they would like us to have more of, that would be helpful.
I assume that means we're doing a good job.
If there's anything else people want me to cover, I can, or we can finish up.
Last question. Thanks. So I've been doing now recently systematic review about tamoxifen and aromatase inhibitors. As a clinical pharmacist, I'm very interested in those medications. And actually, so we identified eventually 66 studies to be included. Actually, it's a bit weird, like only 12 studies were in the PharmGKB. So I was just thinking about, is there like any, like what is the proportion, for example, if you take one variant, one gene or one drug, what's the proportion that you think is in the PharmGKB, just roughly?
It'd be really hard to say because like, so you've got publication bias on like where people in certain fields publish that can influence whether we've captured it or not. We probably have got like a peak of tamoxifen ones around from like when the guideline or when it's such a tricky area because there were so many papers that were like contradictory, or like the study populations were just slightly different, or different enough that the effects were really difficult for a while. And so we've probably got a bunch from then, and then maybe not so much more recently because other things have had greater focus. If there's stuff you think we should have, please send it. If they're not specific about like genotyping, then we can't get it in. But if we can write variant annotations on it, we would.
Okay, so you only include the ones that are actually submitted to you. Is it
no
what you do?
So like we go looking for stuff, but if like if they don't have things described in a way that either, if they're not in a journal that we regularly curate, and they're not describing their result, their work in a way that shows that they're looking at variance and drug response or variance and toxicity, then it's hard for us to catch it, right? So if it's a paper where they're mostly looking at drug interaction, and they're not like overtly saying that it's via 2D6, or that the gene's not talked about, then we're going to miss it. Okay, so because in the past, actually, with help of Rachel, actually, we did some 2 years ago, 2 systematic reviews, and one of the things that we actually found is very helpful. So we identified studies as meta-analysis and systematic reviews. So it's a review of reviews. And we did one about clinical trials. What we found, it could be helpful, I don't know, in PharmGKB, if you just only identify the ones that are systematic reviews or meta-analysis, then the studies are already there in a way. They're being captured through. I know that's not very sensitive because the authors might have used different kind of search strategies, but that was really, really helpful. So we extracted the studies from meta-analysis, and that enriched the whole thing. So we had the panel, and it was very actually like comprehensive in a way. So we identified 500 studies, but from the meta-analysis, we identified many ones that they were only identified if you use a particular search strategy with brand names of the medicines or particular phenotypes. So that was like a bit good strategy we found. Yeah, I mean, we have done that for some, but like in general, we're swamped with papers. So unless there's something where we're working with people on a particular thing, to go out and look at a strategy to find more papers is not on our list.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else have any questions before we finish up? All right. Well, thanks for attending, everybody. And like I said, if you've got any comments or further questions or advice, please send it to feedback, and thanks for coming.